once again, and thank you and welcome to Tourism Cities at INDABA 2014. My name again, as I mentioned, is Maud Masiwa, and I will be facilitating this workshop for the rest of the day. At this juncture, I'm going to ask Nombulelo Mkefa from the city of Cape Town to come forward. I'm just going to read a short profile on Mrs. Mkefa. She is the Director of Tourism at the City of Cape Town. As Director of Tourism, she leads the city's mandate for local tourism that encompasses not only the city's strategic partnerships for marketing initiatives and for visitor services, but also destination management in ensuring that Cape Town can and is ready to receive visitors. Nombulelo, as some of you are sure are aware, has vast experience in community-based tourism and in local tourism. And the local government has a vision to lead Cape Town in becoming a responsible tourism destination. I think at this juncture, most of us will recall the Cape Town Declaration, culmination of the first international conference on responsible tourism in 2002. It was a great destination milestone. I mean, all over the world we hear about the Cape Town Declaration. In 2004, her work on community-based tourism development won her an Impululelo Award, a silver, that recognizes excellence and innovative work in the public sector. In the same year, the city adopted the Cape Town, the Tourism Development Framework, and the city of Cape Town has already gained recognition in 2009 by being awarded the Best Destination by Virgin Holidays Responsible Tourism Awards at the WTM in London. Thank you very much. Let us welcome Mrs. Mkefa.
Good morning, friends, colleagues, and visitors to the City at INDABA seminar and to Durban. Mine is a task because the formalities will be done in terms of an opening and a welcome from our mayoral portfolio committee member, Councillor Roxanne Hun, who is apparently just about to land at King Shaka, and she'll be on her way. Thank you for your patience. Today marks a monumental seminar, monumental date for this series. The Cities at INDABA series was the brainchild of Sisangondo in the tourism department of the City of Cape Town. And it was based on the recognition that it is a unique platform in South Africa in terms of tourism, where the tourism minds, tourism practitioners across the region, across the continent, come together here. And also the recognition that this platform is much more and should be much more than marketing, should be much more than buyers and also making deals, even though that deal breaking was a large component of why platforms like these are created. So it was about how do we leverage this capacity, this brain power that is all sort of concentrated in this space. The second aspect of the vision was around cities as large tourism areas, the whole issue around urban tourism and the challenges that destinations face, especially cities. If we look at the rest of the continent, and we've been trying, it is very difficult to set up concrete programs with cities other than having to work through the national government. And so there are very unique aspects around developing cities and tourism and striving towards sustainable cities. And so after 5 years being here, driving this and watching this program grow from strength to strength, and the level, and not only just in terms of the response it's getting, but the level of participation and the reach that the program has achieved has been quite gratifying. Today, I want to, in a sense, I'm not going to do a presentation, because I think today, being this landmark 5-year cities at INDABA, it's also about reflecting. It's also about looking forward in terms of 20 years, and what does that spell for tourism going forward? Have we learned anything? How do we take it forward? What are the new challenges that tourism development faces in this region, given the global challenges, given where we're at in terms of achieving or not achieving the Millennium Development Goals, and also how does that sit against the trends? WTO puts out the tourism trend. So how does all this sit in terms of being able still to realize the aspirations and the promise of our governments in terms of this is the sector that becomes the game changer in terms of creating opportunities, in terms of growing incomes, without decimating that makes this destination attractive in the first place. So this is what this seminar is going to be about. We are happy to have Maud Masiwa as the facilitator for the cities at INDABA. Maud's work in terms of sustainable and developmental tourism development has really made me particularly proud of what she's achieved within communities, especially in the work with women around tourism. Maud leads an organization, a company called Capstone Training and Development. She found her feet in tourism in 1985, having worked at the time for a national airline. And then she went into retail and wholesale in terms of the travel business. She's worked in East, West, and Southern Africa in the private sector. As an entrepreneur and an advocate for the emancipation of entrepreneurship, and she manages to keep abreast with the fast changing issues that face SME development across the continent. Under her leadership, her company, Capstone Training and Development, has taken the mandate to involve local communities in active, responsible tourism practice, so that the benefits to be gained can be distributed and shared equitably. She holds a number of internationally recognized qualifications in travel and tourism, entrepreneurship development, education, and community development. Currently, she's in her last phase of her MSc degree program in responsible tourism management through Leeds Metropolitan University in the UK. So I'd like you to welcome officially Maud to the podium, and her job is to usher us through the processes of today. Thank you very much. Join us.
Thank you very much, Tam. I think we're just going to do a bit of housekeeping quickly so that we're all at par. I do understand always at Tourism City seminars every year, we sort of have people coming in at different times and to listen to different sessions. So if we may, I don't know if it's going to work, but if you are able to move forward so that, you know, we can keep sort of the last rows available, that would be great, that, you know, so we can sort of bring you closer up front. Unless you're going to be walking in and out, maybe that would be okay if you sat on the edges. Okay. That's first and foremost. And then secondly, because of the time that we started, we are going to work through the morning, so we won't take that morning tea break. However, do feel free to go out if you feel like a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, because the station will still be available for you. Right. There are some slight changes on the program, and I will keep advising you of those changes as they come along, and if, you know, we need to take on or let you know that somebody isn't available, we'll let you know as the day goes by. But other than that, I think, you know, the Tourism Cities event every year is a very important event, and I'm privileged and totally honored to be facilitating this workshop today. And the speakers that we have here today, who are going to lead the discussions, the two sessions that we have, the morning one and the afternoon one, are people who come with vast experience in the tourism sector, who've also been, the organizations they come from have been leaders in the tourism development across South Africa and across the continent. And you will find that their points that they will raise in their presentations are key to the panel discussions that we're going to have as the day goes by. We ask that please, if you have a contribution, please write down your questions so that when we come to the Q&A point, you're able to address your questions to the panel. And the lead speaker would still be here as well, so if there's anything that comes up in that the lead's presentation, you have an opportunity to ask. But because you know, it was a lot of stuff that we need to get through, there's a lot of presentations, a lot of contributions, please note that it will be best for you to keep the points for the Q&A sessions. The Q&A sessions are broken into two. For the first session, we will have a Q&A session just before lunch, and the second one will be just before we end the day, so that each session has its own Q&A. All right. I don't think there's anything else. If there isn't, I think I would like to introduce to you our first lead speaker. And our first lead speaker is Mrs. Gillian Saunders. Gillian is the Director and Head of Advisory Services at Grant Thornton. And she's the head of, she is actually with Grant Thornton in South Africa. She holds a BSc Honours in Hotel, Catering and Tourism Management and an MBA. Gillian worked in the institutional catering industry and hotel industry in Europe before joining the Southern Sun Group in South Africa as an assistant manager in Ops in 1982. She was appointed as a director of the consultancy in March of 1990 and became a principal of the audit firm and head of the Hotel and Tourism Consultancy in September 1997. As such, she has consulted extensively in all aspects of these industries for more than 25 years. Gillian was appointed Head of Advisory Services in 2009. She is the author of a number of articles and a regular commentator in the media, particularly hotels and tourism. She is the guest lecturer at the University of Pretoria's Department of Tourism and at the University of Johannesburg School of Tourism and Hospitality. She is also the chairperson of the board of the University of Johannesburg Kersner School of Tourism and Hospitality. Without any further ado, I'd like to call upon Gillian to come up.
Thank you very much for that introduction. And good morning, everybody. It really is a privilege to talk to you at the city's event at INDABA in 2014. And I think what I'm going to talk about is very seminal, given where we are, having just gone through an election on Wednesday, on the 7th of May, which was our 20 years of democracy, our 5th national election. And I was tasked with a look at where has tourism gone in those 20 years. So if you'll give me a second, I'm just going to get my presentation up here, because it's not the right one yet. We'll get to it. presentation or subtitle, look where we've come from. Because I actually think if we sit back, and not that many of you in the room are as long in the tooth as me, so you don't all remember all of this. But I was around 20 years ago, and even more than 20 years ago, and it was such a nice memory jog to go back through some of these things and say where have we come from. But I thought if we're going to say where we've come from, we should just have a very quick glance at where the world has come from. So back in 1994, there was just over 509 million international arrivals globally, and that had grown in 2013. Unfortunately, of course, we're halfway through 2014, so we don't always have 2014 numbers. It had grown to just over 1 billion. The second year we were tapping 1 billion international arrivals, and it was 1.067 billion international arrivals. And the important thing is you see it's a continual upward trend. And in fact, the average growth rate over that period was 4% per annum. We saw a couple of declines. The worst one probably being around 2011, 2010. But 2009, the global economic crisis was a big decline as well. So the world didn't do too badly. And South Africa, that's the world average growth rates. And so here you see the year-on-year change, and you see that actually there's a big variability. And we had two bad periods here in the early 2000s of not very much growth, and then we had our 2008-9 economic crisis. So our tourism is very, very linked to economics, and in the early 2000s it was economics, and it was also the first Gulf War that had a dent on tourism arrivals globally. But as I said, 4% growth per annum on average. Where are we in South Africa? Okay, in South Africa we measure things differently all the time. So please bear with me, I'm not going to explain the exact difference in all the measurements. It's at the bottom of my slides. But back in 1994 we were measuring visitor arrivals. So we had in 1994, I think it was 3.6 million international visitors came to South Africa, of which 610,000 were from overseas. That blue line is the visitor line. Okay, we still measure visitors, but we don't have the 2013 numbers yet. But in 2012, we got to 13.1 million visitors. Visitors do not necessarily stay overnight, so we're using the international definition of tourism now, and in 2009, here we started counting overseas tourist visitors. So that's the overseas visitors line, and you can see, look, it sort of tracks the visitor line, but there is a difference. Some people are staying less than one night, and people stay over one night. Here's the number, we got to just over 9 million in 2012. We don't, in 2013. I don't have a breakdown of the 2013 number. What does our growth rates look like? Our growth rates are very erratic, up and down and up and down. We had phenomenal growth in 1995. So after 1994, 22.3% growth in international visitors. That year, for those of you who remember, the growth in overseas visitors was over 50%. It was 52%. Everybody will go back and tell you it was the Rugby World Cup. Yes, we had a Rugby World Cup, but the numbers for the Rugby World Cup were about 27,000 visitors. They weren't really the big dent. We just got this brand new democracy, flavour of the globe. South Africa was the place to come. Business people were traipsing through here en masse to see if there was a business opportunity, and leisure tourism suddenly, if you like to call it, it was suddenly freed up to come to South Africa in a big way. We thereafter saw very different sort of growth rates. We experienced the same global problems around the early 2000s, and we saw the global economic crisis drop in our growth rate there. What we also saw is 2010, the Soccer World Cup. So the big growth we had here in 2010 was mainly the Soccer World Cup. And the low growth we had in 2011 was also the Soccer World Cup, because once your base went up in 2010, then your 2011 arrivals had a real challenge to grow further on 2010. We still managed it. We grew a little bit in 2011, but we didn't grow that much. But our long-term average growth, which I don't have there, was about 6.7, 6.9% per annum. So we beat the world over that period. And in fact, in some periods, we were growing at 9, 10% per annum on average. So we really had strong foreign tourism growth to South Africa. I've just shown you a pattern here of how many of those visitors were overseas and how many were from African continents. So the percentage here is the African continent percent. You can see we started about 70%, because it's now 80% to 20%. So it's 20% overseas, 80% African. Declines to about 70 and 30, and it's gone back now to 20% and 70% African. But that is your visitors. If we look at the overnight tourists, and we've only got 2 years of that, this is the overnight tourists on this side, and this is the visitors on that side. What you actually see is that the overseas visitors are more likely to stay overnight than the African, and the percentage goes up. So here you have a percentage of 20% of visitors are overseas, but nearly 30% of tourists are from overseas. So we have more overnight visitors from overseas and far more day visitors from Africa. But the trend hasn't changed much in terms of the mix of those visitors over the years. I thought we'd look at a couple of countries just to see. So I think the one to pick out first is maybe the Netherlands. That's 6 times as many visitors from the Netherlands. The USA is 5 times as many visitors. France is about 4 times as many visitors. The UK and Germany is about 3 times as many visitors. So those strong overseas markets have grown phenomenally over the period. We weren't even measuring Asia in 1994, so I have no numbers. And even more recently, we haven't measured all the countries in Asia, but we've gone from 182,000 and more than doubled over the decade, of which to 429,000 down here, of which 153,000 are from China. Okay. So if you look at the growth, the first column is the growth from 1993 to 2004, the first decade. You can see in the first decade, in the first decade we had strong growth rates everywhere. We have no data on the East. And the second decade we've got much slower growth rates. So things tailed off, growth declined. But wow, in comes the East at 10% average growth on the second decade. So you can see that change that's beginning to come through in our numbers, which is a global change in where tourists are coming from and travelling from. The average over the whole period for each country is there. So it's pretty strong growth. Every single country outpaced the worldwide growth in international arrivals in terms of their arrivals to South Africa over the 20 years. What did they come from? I don't have 1994 data, I have 1996 data. I don't have South African tourism research from 96 or 94. I just have South Africa's information. So it's not as accurate as what we now get from South African tourism research. But the overseas people were about 3/4 on holiday, and the African visitors were about 80% on holiday or leisure. And not that much for business, but 15% of overseas and about 11% of Africans. Now we have better data from really good sample surveys, and this is what it looks like in 2013. In actual fact, the holiday component has gone down. For overseas visitors, though, it's still 55%. It's a lot more than for the African visitors, where it's only just about a quarter of the visitors come on holiday. And 64% are coming on business. And business would include all the shopping for trading purposes that we know a lot of Africans come for. And we have a lot more data. I'm just painting the simple picture now. We have a lot more data on what the other breaks down to, medical, religious, etc. Domestic tourism. Very brief picture. The first thing is, even now, I don't think we measure domestic tourism accurately enough to say there's a trend. So I've put the numbers up there from the surveys that we've got. In 1996, we said there was 30.4 million trips. In 2001, it was 33.5. And the odd survey in between also showed a bit of growth. But more or less since the early 2000s, all the surveys have come down to 2012 survey, we've only got 25.4 million domestic trips, apparently. So my caveat is, I'm not sure that I believe we undercount domestic tourism. And some of the research we've done shows that there's probably significantly more than 25.4 million. But that's the best data we've got. I think it's a bit sad, actually, that after however many years of the domestic tourism industry and 20 years into our democracy, we still don't really have a handle on domestic tourism. The two maps are color-coded. So the darkest green maps are where most people, darkest green countries, provinces are where most people go to. As you get lighter green through yellow, less people are going. And as you get to, I think it's brown, least people are going there. So it's percentage of those trips in 2001, because I don't have this data for earlier, and in 2012. It didn't change a lot. But it's interesting that in 2000, Gauteng was the top destination, and it was just pipping KwaZulu-Natal at 19%. It got 20% of trips. That's turned around. KwaZulu-Natal is now getting 24% of trips, and Gauteng only 17%. The Western and the Eastern Cape seem to have declined in terms of share, so they've gone down to these lower numbers than here. And the provinces that seem to have won in terms of share are provinces like Mpumalanga and Limpopo, where they've gone up in percentage share. But always remember that that doesn't show, because this number was 33 and it's gone down to 25. Most of those provinces actually on the stats show a declining number of arrivals in domestic tourism. Why do people travel domestically? The thing to see is, in 2001, 58%, nearly 60% visiting friends and relatives, and it's now up to a quarter of the travel that gets measured is visiting friends and relatives. And business and holiday are fairly small proportions, but declining proportion of the total. Let's look at our supply in the industry. Okay. Now again, these are definitely not hard and fast statistics, but we did research in 1994 and in 2001, and in 2009 the National Tourism Department did a database in preparation for the World Cup. So it just gives us a flavour of how much accommodation there is out there. So we had 726 hotels that grew to 1,562, more than doubled over the period. The growth was it fluctuated. In some years there was huge amounts of extra supply, in some years there wasn't as much. Huge growth in things like guest houses and guest farms, up to 7,000. Quite strong growth in bed and breakfast, up to more than 3,000. But I think there'd been a lot of growth already by the time we hit 1994 in the bed and breakfast. But I think the total is the one that's interesting, 7,700 up to nearly 20,000. Take them as a ballpark, but there is no doubt we've seen a huge amount of growth in the accommodation stock available for tourists in the country, which also leads me to believe that the domestic tourism didn't decline as much as the numbers tell us. We have to have had both foreign tourism and domestic tourism growth to support this sort of increase in the stock of accommodation. Just to look at where, each line here is Joburg at the top, Cape Town here, and Durban at the bottom. At different points, we looked at the formal hotel stock. So you see Johannesburg started with about 54 formal hotels, gone up to 120 hotels over most of the period. Cape Town started with 32 formal hotels, now at about 134. We did an exercise in 2011, we haven't done an updated one, but largely hotels have not opened since 2011. The World Cup and the growth we saw prior to the recessionary period meant a lot of hotels opened and then nobody was investing in hotels for the last few years. So I would expect the 2011 number to be roughly right. Durban and Umhlanga, 37 hotels, growing up to 59 hotels. And those are the numbers of blooms in our formal hotel database we track. So there's a huge amount of growth. How are those hotels doing? I love this picture. The hotel industry, and I'm sure some of you in the audience are in the accommodation and hotel industry, we moaned here like mad in 2011. It was like the worst times we've ever had. Guess what? It wasn't worse. It was much worse here in the early 2000s, or late 1900s. And the same thing happened here without a World Cup. Remember in 1995, we were the flavour of the globe, and we had 50% increase in overseas tourists. So what did people do? They built lots of hotels. So they built lots of hotels, and the occupancies came down because there was too many hotels. Then the demand grew again, and the occupancies crept up, yes, with a couple of dips. Peaked in 2010, and then, well, peaked just before 2010, when we had the really boom years for this industry, from 2005, 2006, 2007. I've been in the industry since 1982, and those were the boom years that surpassed any in terms of the hotel performance. That was brilliant. We dived in 2011 when we didn't have the World Cup, and the recession finally hit us, and we're now creeping back to what I call average. If you were to put a line through here of what would be a decent occupancy, it's probably at around 65%. We're probably long-term averaging around 65%. That's okay, it's okay. But you will always have these dips, and it's not just South Africa or our cities that have them. Just to see how much you pay for a hotel now. So for a 5-star hotel back in 1994, you wouldn't even pay 300 rand. That was an average rate. Just to say average rates are not necessarily the rack rate that people charge, because there's a lot of discounting and things like this. This is the actual average achieved rate. And look where 5 stars got to now. We've tipped over 2,000 rand average room rate for a 5-star hotel at the moment. Helped a little bit by the week round, I might say. And that's the 2014 year to date. And you see everybody else tracks it. It's very interesting, the red line is the overall industry average. And it was originally tracking the 3-star line, and then started to track the 4-star line totally, which I think is very interesting, the overall industry average. My other comment, and it's a long-term comment for everybody, especially in the industry, is this, that we have a problem between 4 and 3-star and 4 and 5-star. The gap of the rate the 4 stars can achieve to 5 stars is too big, whereas the gap from 3 to 4 stars is too small. Our 4-star rates are too soft. Okay? They should be stronger. Sorry about that, guys. If you're staying in 4 stars, you should be paying more. It's too cheap. Just a quick flash of some other statistics that could be interesting. This is SunPark statistics. This is their room occupancy and number of visitors. I mean, room occupancy, SunParks is lucky, hey? They really achieve a good room occupancy. 67% average back in 93, 94 years, and it crept up. They've even got to 70% average now, 2012, 2013 in the last report. But look at the number of guests. They've gone from 1 million to 5 million, basically, guests to the parks. That is what we offer in South Africa to our domestic people and to our international people. We have this phenomenal product in our parks. And that just shows the tale of success there, I think, in terms of those parks and visitors to the parks. Your conference venues. We've done a number of studies over the year. In 1994, we estimated, based on trawling through the guides that were available, there was about 1,250 venues. We reckon, in 2014, we're currently working with South African Tourism, with another company called Ground Control, and we've just done another trawl through everything, and and we came to 2,598 venues, which is almost 4% growth in conference venues per annum. Remember, conference venues come from 50 delegates to sort of 2,000 delegates, so you can't really see capacity totally from this, but it's an indicator that we've grown here. But maybe the best indicator is our 3 ICCs. 1994, no ICCs. Now a country with 3 world-class ICCs, most of them expanding, phenomenal capacities. The first one was this one in 1997, so it's old, eh? We don't realise how old it is. Then the Sandton Convention Centre has also been open for 14 years this year, and then the Cape Town ICC came last but not least, for the Cape Townians. This is City of Cape Town doing this, with a fantastic capacity. So I think these have been phenomenally successful, and they've put us on the map internationally in particular. And in fact, on the international conference ranking, I think we assisted South African tourism this year in doing their ECA submission, and I think we got to about 112 conferences. I've forgotten the exact number. We managed to up it quite significantly. Casino licenses. Guess what? Do you remember there was 17 homeland casinos in 1994? We didn't have casinos really, but you did have funny little Pondoki ones in some homelands, and the big Sun City one was the one everybody knew about. Casinos changed radically. Those of you who remember, there was a Howard Commission which said we should have 12 mega casinos. Then there was a, gee, I forgot the name, there was another guy, another advocate or whatever, did another commission said we should have 40 casinos. Of the 40 casino licenses that were given to all the 9 provinces in a certain allocation, 38 are out there and operating. I won't go through, but just to prove it, here you see for each province there's 5 allocated, 4. So there's still 1 to go in the Eastern Cape. Most of them are allocated and operating, so that's a lot of casinos. Phenomenal attractions for the international market in many instances, as well as the domestic tourists. Talk about transport for a minute. Also, we used to do, I don't know if anybody remembers it, called Tourism Talk. Lucky we used to write that because we used to quantify the industry, and I think the first one came out in 1992 or 1993. So I've used those and gone back to them. If you look at coaches, luxury coaches we thought were a problem in 1992 that was constraining, 1993, it was constraining the industry. We had 340. And there's all sorts of issues related to import duties and getting them constructed or built in this country or imported. Went up to about 400 in 2001, and it's now at 720 luxury coaches. This is not your intercity coaches, this is your decent, very luxury tourism coaches. Car hire fleet, 25,000, now 65,000 this year. We work with the car hire industry on our surveys. Airlines, this is an interesting story. Those stories are simply growth. They're normal growth in demand and the ability to add capacity to your infrastructure. Airlines, 21 international airlines in 1993, radically grew, radically to 63 by 1995. Again, we were the place that every airline, every business in the world wanted to be in South Africa in 95. Radically shrank to 40 in 2001. They just dropped off. They dropped routes. Some were local ones that set up. There was 2 local international airlines, one called USA Africa, if anybody remembers it, and another I think was Luxavia, around international routes, didn't last. And now we've gone up though. What we haven't, I think, noticed is how far we've come up now to 76 international airlines operating out of South Africa. Some only operate out of Durban, most operate out of Joburg. So I think that shows the same thing. The transport industry is coming along with us, it's had huge growth. And I didn't even put on here that we now have 3 phenomenal upgraded international airports in Cape Town, Durban and Joburg. Hey, we had 0 World Heritage Sites in 1994. Now we've got 8. We globally ranked quite high in terms of the number of World Heritage Sites we have. And that just lists them out for you. What an amazing country. 8 World Heritage Sites over 20 years. Okay, what did that all mean? What did it do for our economy? This is the World Travel and Tourism Council's numbers in terms of economic contribution. So the top one is what we call the direct industry and the number of jobs. We had 253,000 jobs in 1993 in the industry. That's grown to 664,000. The growth is an average of 4.7% per annum growth. If you take the greater economic contribution, which is direct and indirect, we started with 529 jobs, which has grown to 1.43, 1.44 million. So we've got nearly 1.5 million jobs in our industry. That's even slightly higher growth at 4.9%. So, you know, there's been our problems, there's been our challenges, but we've produced an extra 1 million jobs almost in this industry for people, directly or indirectly. And I'm just going to say, I do think we probably undercount this because we undercount the domestic tourism industry. So our domestic tourism numbers that feed into all of this, I believe, are undercounted. And so there's probably more jobs. The other thing we undercount, I believe, is the international data on how much international tourists spend excludes anything they spend before they leave the country of origin. So there's something called prepaid expenditure. For overseas tourists, that can be as much as 40,000, 45,000 rand, of which a percentage comes to South Africa. We don't count that, and that also would feed into higher job numbers. So I'm just saying, I'm to argue with something, I always argue with everything. I think this is probably conservative. If you actually look at our contribution to jobs, there it's also gone up significantly. It was 4.4% and now it's 10.2% contribution to jobs, direct and indirect. Similarly, it was 2.1% and it's gone up to 4.7%. Percentage of GDP, direct percentage, 1.7, now at 4.3%. That's I think what some of the NDT signs out there say. We were a significant contributor to GDP. If you take the broader measure, we're almost at 10% contribution, and we are almost at the worldwide average. We're finally, as a country, getting to be an average contributor to GDP from our industry. I would just like to say about the potential, and I'm not the potential speaker, I'm talking about the past. In South Africa, we have such a phenomenal industry, we could be higher than the average, the global average. So the growth there, in terms of the contribution, was 8% per annum and 7.3%. The sad thing about that is we grew the contribution to GDP, or the amount, faster than we grew jobs. So we did not employ at the same rate as we were employing as an industry. So our job multiplier actually declined over the period. Because this growth in actual GDP, at 7.3 and 8 is higher than that growth of 4.9 and 4.7. It's maybe good for the businesses because that means we became more productive. Okay, so there's always two sides to every coin, but we possibly didn't employ as much as our employment multiplier was earlier on. How important is tourism? Back in 1994, before 1994, we had tourism as an adjunct to some ministry called the Ministry of Administration and Tourism, and it didn't have a single functionary for tourism, but there was a minister. And then we briefly got a minister, Dr. Banshaw, I've got his name, just before 94, and then immediately they caved tourism back into some other ministry. I think it went straight to Environment Affairs. But in 1994, I think it was less than 5 people in the department. Now, and maybe we've gone too far here, don't shoot me, from the department here. Now we have 526 posts in a dedicated Department of Tourism with a dedicated minister. From 1994, we had Dr. David de Villiers, if anybody remembers Dr. David de Villiers. We briefly had Tito Mboweni, then we had Vali Musa, who was good because he was there for a number of years, and now we've had Martinez for a number of years, and guess what, we don't have a minister at the moment because we're waiting on the new cabinet. So hopefully we've still got a department, we've still got a ministry. But I think it does show that, tourism was a real Cinderella in 1994. And before 1994, it was a real Cinderella. It isn't a Cinderella anymore. It may not yet be the fairy princess in the ball gown and whatever, but it's gone a long way. Some other things, South African tourism budget. I got in 1996, there wasn't South African tourism until 1996, it was SATOR before then, if those people remember. I took the budget, which was actually 65 million, and I implied inflation. The 1996 budget is worth 203 million in today's round. Today's budget for this year, the one that's just come out, 856 million, 7.5% annual increase. Yay, that's great. But I haven't got it on the slide. The World Economic Forum measures us in terms of government expenditure on tourism. We come 135th out of 148 countries. We do not spend enough on tourism. Yeah, the number went up, didn't go far enough. The big jump, if you were to see it, was when Vali Musa actually did his strategy, I think it was tourism growth strategy towards the end of the 1990s, 1998, 1999. The industry got together and created the TOMSA levy, and the government agreed via South African tourism to equal our upgraded contribution and put the base budget up. So there was actually a quantum leap in about 98 or 99, and then, unfortunately, this budget, this one, is actually a 2% growth on 2012-2013. That's not good enough. If you give tourism a 2% growth, when inflation is 5%, and we globally compete against the Australias and the Thailands and the whatevers, yeah, we're not going to make tourism work. So, but I guess it's a lot better than 203 million in 1996. Thought I'd just talk through, I've mentioned already some of the departments of tourism that we had, and we now also have the dedicated department. South African tourism was created in 1996. Some people may remember that the ANC, just before the elections, created a forum called the National Tourism Forum. Peter Makaba was the head of the National Tourism Forum, and we spent a lot of time working with them to try and look at how we would structure tourism and get tourism going in a new democratic South Africa. A key point was the 1994 interim constitution, and the principles were embedded in the final constitution's tourism concurrent power. I think it's our Achilles heel as well as a good thing. It's our Achilles heel because every municipality, every province, and the national government have all got a role in tourism, and we don't always sort that out in a way that becomes efficient, that we collaborate and work together. There was a national tourism task team in 1994, which was created between the public sector and the private sector to look at, first of all, we involved in getting the Green Paper out on tourism, and then the 1996 White Paper on tourism. The 1996 White Paper on tourism is still the national tourism policy. It hasn't been superseded. It was a pretty good document, but no, it should be relooked at. In 1996, the Tourism Business Council was created after the private sector got together and said we need a way to have a good umbrella association for the industry. Tourism first got into national policy in terms of economic policy in the Tourism in Gear program, which was in the late 1990s, and that was then superseded by Valley Moose's program. That's the 1999 Tourism Action Plan. That was Valley Moose's action plan for tourism, which definitely galvanized government and galvanized budgets into tourism in a big way. TOMSA started in 2001. That's the voluntary levy. The National Tourism Sector Strategy was probably the next big thing, which came out in 2011, which was a very good collaboration between the public and the private sector. And just so you know, the Tourism Act has just come in this year after about, I think, 2 years or 3 years on the table, and it replaces the 1993 Tourism Act that we have there. So there's been stuff going on in tourism. I'm never sure that it's been effective or achieved what it needs to achieve. Tourism in Gear had targets, we never made any of those targets. 1999 Tourism Action Plan had targets, we never made any of those targets. The 2011 National Tourism Sector Strategy has a lot of targets. I suspect we will make them because I don't think they're challenging enough. So, but it's at least good that we've got a National Tourism Sector Strategy and we have targets. Social impacts, I think some of the other people may talk to this, but I think we just need to say that there probably isn't enough here. I put it some of the places where we are doing things to make sure that tourism delivers the benefits for everybody, like fair trade in tourism, like the Tourism Enterprise Programme, which Lisa will talk about. I mentioned employment numbers. There's no doubt that livelihoods of many millions, if you think of dependency ratios of South Africans, are due to tourism. And quality of life. I think we are seeing tourism play a part in terms of Africans, either through the direct impact of having jobs related to tourism, or the other big impact is becoming tourists, becoming visitors, going to the visitor attractions, going on holidays, not just as much as we would like. I just put as at the end, the 1996 White Paper vision for tourism was to develop the tourism industry as a national priority in a sustainable and acceptable manner so that it will contribute significantly to the improvement of the quality of life of every South African. So if we're to unpack that and measure ourselves, I'd say, yeah, I didn't even do this in my presentation, but if I had to give ourselves a scorecard, we probably got a pass. I don't know that we got an A. Okay. I think there's a little bit of work to do to really start delivering on some of those things. And those are still the things we want to embody in what tourism should be doing for the country and the people of South Africa. That's my setting the scene. Maud, are you going to introduce the panelists then? Okay, thanks very much, everybody.
That was very interesting, and thank you ever so much, Gillian, for setting the scene for us. I'm at this stage going to call the panelists for the first session, and I'll introduce them very briefly. First of all, I'd like to call up onto the stage. I would like to call upon Lisa. Lisa is the General Manager Ops at the Tourism Enterprise Partnership of South Africa. She graduated from the University of Western Cape in 1993 and went on to do both a teaching degree and her BA Honours degree cum laude when she majored in urban management and geographic systems in 1994. Later, Lisa took on a number of post-grad courses in this field. She started her career in research and analysis, working for the Western Cape Trade and Investment Agency, and later on moved to become the marketing manager officer of the Western Cape government in the Department of Economic Development in 1997. Lisa Ann followed her research and consulting career to Grant Thornton in 1999, and 4 years later she took a post at the Department of Environmental Affairs and Tourism as Director of Research and Development. Her diligence and work ethic got her promoted to Chief Director in charge of Tourism Development in 2006. She was later recruited by TEP as the General Manager, where she oversees all 9 TEP provincial offices. Lisa Ann's responsibilities also include developing strategies for SMEs in the tourism industry and facilitating the financial sustainability of the organization, amongst others. So we have somebody who's going to give us an insight onto entrepreneurship and the walk with entrepreneurs. The next person I'd like to call is Pelisa Mankau, at the head of department at Johannesburg Tourism. She studied tourism at a postgraduate level and acquired international tourism industry experience working for the Office of Tourism and Promotions in Washington, D.C., as well as a Trump International in New York. Pelisa has extensive work experience in economic development initiatives aimed at transforming the economy of South Africa, particularly in the tourism sector. Prior to joining the Johannesburg Tourism Company as General Manager for the Visitor Services Bureau, she worked for the IDC, which is the Industrial Development Corporation, in the Tourism Strategic Business Unit, and later managed the corporate social investments. Her experience at IDC gave her extensive insight into the nature of challenges that previously disadvantaged people face when initiating and growing business incentives. I think I will quickly run through it because we do have time constraints. As head of the Joburg Tourism, she represents one of the continent's leading tourism destinations. Ms. Mankau is responsible for positioning Johannesburg not only as the continent's leading business hub, but also as an exciting, vibrant, year-round destination for signature events, lifestyle, the arts, culture, fashion, sports, and mega events. Thank you very much. The next person I'd like to call on is Mr. Ndegwa, Murithi Ndegwa. He is the managing director. He's the current managing director for the Kenya Tourism Board, KTB, a position he's held since 2009. Prior to his appointment to KTB, Mr. Ndegwa was the managing director of the East African Cables, Tanzania Limited. He holds a master's degree in business admin and has made a distinguished career in the field of marketing and public relations, which is critical in the stewardship of a tourism marketing agency. And the last person I'd like to call to this panel would be Enver Dumni. He's the CEO. As a lifetime Cape Townian, Enver knows all about the mother city, her gems and her people. Prior to working at Cape Town Tourism, Enver worked at IBM, Eskom, Nedbank, and Integra Financial Services. In January of 2010, ahead of the 2010 FIFA World Cup, Mr. Dumni studied at Cape Town Tourism started at Cape Town Tourism as the executive manager of tourism services. As a long-time goal of Enver's, he bravely took the leap as CEO on the 1st of August 2013, and he continues to study, having graduated from the University of the Western Cape. He's currently doing his MBA thesis through the Management College of South Africa. I think we have a very interesting group of panelists here with us. What I'm going to do is I'm going to address questions to each panelist, and they will go through the answers. And then what we'll do, like I said before, we'll engage into a Q&A session straight after we finish with that. I'm going to ask Gillian, is it possible for you to take a seat with us here? But Gillian will also be available to add to whatever we'll have discussed on this end. So she'll still be a part of this panel as well. Thank you ever so much. My first question, I think I'm going to start with the gentleman in this session. Thank you. Mr. Ndegwa, I'd like you to tell us a bit about the tourism sector in Kenya over the past 20 years or more. You know, looking back, I'm sure a lot of us have, you know, even before the advent of democracy in South Africa, had heard a lot about where Kenya was and, you know, the flavor of what Kenya had to offer as sun, sand, and, you know, beach holidays. And it was always a model that the rest of the continent always wanted to hear about. If you could tell us a bit about that 20-year journey for Kenya.
Thank you very much. I think in terms of looking at the journey that we've taken through, if we go back to the last about 10 years, perhaps maybe it's important for me to say that in terms of tourism, Kenya tourism contributes about 11% of the country's GDP, and it's been recognized as one of the key pillars that will drive the country into middle income status by the year 2030, because we have a vision called Vision 2030, which says that by the year 2030 we want Kenya to be a middle-income country. And we have 6 pillars, one of them being tourism. For tourism in Kenya, we've been in existence for many years, since independence. We got our independence about 50 years ago, and tourism has been embraced way back since the 40s, when the famous former president of the US made excursions in Africa, Franklin Roosevelt, and one of the countries that he visited. This is really and truly a magical destination. So we've been embracing tourism ever since then. And for us as a country, there's very good collaboration between the government and the private sector. If you go into the hard facts in terms of the numbers, we'll be looking at arrivals having grown by more than 200%, from less than 1 million in 10 years ago to close to 2 million right now. And also in terms of revenue, in terms of Kenya shillings, we had a revenue base of less than 20 billion Kenya shillings. And by the way, 8.9 Kenya shillings is equivalent to 1 rand, so one can easily convert. And to the level of about 96 billion Kenya shillings as of last year, which means we are talking about a growth from the revenue perspective of more than 480%. And we've been marketing ourselves using the Magical Kenya brand. And in terms of the product portfolio, we look at Kenya as basically a safari destination. And I'm sure, and this is basically what you said, that Kenya is well known as a wildlife safari destination because we offer a true, authentic safari product. We're also well known as a beach destination. But in the recent years, we've also been trying to increase our product range by talking about other products that perhaps the world may not very well know about Kenya. For example, adventure tourism. 2 weeks ago, somebody set a world record in our Rift Valley on paragliding. This is something that perhaps maybe the world might not know, but it's coming in now. There's also other aspects like agro-tourism. Our tea and coffee is very well established, and it's known as a product. And we've been working closely with the private sector so that we can have tea safaris, we can have coffee safaris, so that somebody comes to the country and they see exactly how the coffee is grown, and they also do something. The other area we've been talking about is birding. We hold about 11% of the world's population of flamingos. And not just flamingos, we also have a lot of migratory birds that come. And therefore, for the birding enthusiasts, we've also been showcasing Kenya from that perspective. There is also the other aspect of cultural and heritage tourism. I think she talked about 8 World Heritage Sites. We have almost a similar number, with the latest addition being the lakes in the Rift Valley. We have places like Lamu, places like the Fort Jesus in Mombasa, which are all listed as World Heritage Sites. And in the last couple of years, we've won several awards. Last year, in the World Travel Awards competition, which was held in Doha in Qatar, we were awarded the world's leading safari destination. As a tourism board, also in the last 2 years, 2012 and 2013, we won the Best Tourism Board in Africa award, again under World Travel Awards. And then also in China in 2009, we were rated the best ecotourism destination. And also in the UK in 2011, we were awarded the Best African Tourism Board for Good Safari Awards. And in 2009 also in Spain, we were voted the best undiscovered golfing destination. So we've also been trying to diversify our product from that perspective. I think this in a nutshell gives the perspective of tourism in Kenya, and I think that answers the question perhaps that you raised. Thank you.
Most certainly, thank you ever so much. I think I'm going to bring this one back to you then, Mr. Diego, because what I would like us to understand here is who is it that you believe within Kenya has been a great contributor to that success story? Do you believe it would be the public sector, or is it the private sector, or is it a combined collaborative effort?
The key thing for me I see is in terms of joint collaboration between the government and the private sector. The reason why I say this is because the government has a role to ensure that they give the right policy guidelines, they also give a conducive environment, and also that it enhances and embraces sustainability. And these for us are 3 key things that the government has been doing, and we believe that that is important. Then from the private sector perspective, we believe that it's important also for the private sector to do responsible tourism, so that as the government puts in place measures and policies that are geared towards ensuring that there's sustainability, the private sector, be it the tour operators or the hoteliers, they're also doing things in a responsible manner. The other key thing from the private sector perspective is that they are on the front line. And therefore I believe that they've also got to do what we believe in terms of delivering the brand promise. Because if you say that, come to my country, you'll experience a true authentic safari, then you've got to deliver that brand promise.
Oh, most certainly. Thank you very much, Mr. Ndebo. So my third question here to you, sir, is pertaining to the challenges and the current events that have perhaps started happening, that we've started noticing over the past few years, and more recently last weekend in Kenya. It always sort of has an impact on the tourism sector. And how do players within the tourism sector in Kenya react or respond to these challenges? Because, one thing we've all sort of gotten to understand about Kenya at the moment, and I'm sure the audience here will also agree, is that within these challenges, somehow Kenya manages to arise and come back every year, every time something happens. And we'd like to learn from you today is how have you managed that? How has that been worked?
Thank you. I think perhaps maybe the key thing you're alluding to is about the terrorist attacks that we've had. Let me put things in perspective. One thing that is very clear is that terrorism is a global problem. It is not a problem that is unique to Kenya. It's not a problem that is unique to our sector. It's not a problem that is unique to our area. We've had cases and incidences in very developed nations. We've had cases in New York. We've had cases in Madrid in Spain, in London, in Bali, Indonesia, and so on and so forth. But I think having said that, any visitor who goes to any destination, they want to be sure that they are safe. And again, also, every government has an objective and an obligation to ensure that their citizens are also safe. So, as a government, what we've seen in terms of the measures that the government has put in place is to ensure the safety of the residents and the visitors alike. And there are lots of things that they have been doing, including improving the way surveillance is done, putting CCTV cameras in places that tourists would be visiting, and also ensuring that every establishment, whether it's a hotel, whether it's a facility, they have embraced the whole aspect of security in terms of checking the people as they're coming in, and also looking at areas that perhaps can be targeted, and improving and increasing the surveillance so that you deter any possibility. Again, also from the private sector perspective, we have a very clear collaboration between the private sector and the government. Through our private sector umbrella organization called Kenya Tourism Federation, we have a 7/24 security center where anything that happens within the country, we're able to get information real time. That would therefore mean that any incident that happens, we're able to get to know exactly where it happened,